Okay, we are back live with another Between the Pages book chat. And today we have sci fi author Chris Lodwig here to talk about his book, Systemic. And I'm going to turn it over to him and let him introduce himself. Take it away.
Sure. As you said, my name is Chris Lodwig. I have recently published my very first novel, Systemic, and the book itself it's sort of a utopian slash dystopian book. In the future, we have created a global AI that it's not a bad guy at all. It's actually quite the opposite. In fact, it has gone and solved most of society's problems for us. And so while that sounds very good and very nice, the result of that is that humans don't have anything really to do, and they're consumed with ennui and boredom. And so that's kind of the background of the story and where people are. Everything is fine. It's not great. It's not horrible. It's just fine. And so people are feeling underwhelmed with life. And so that's the background. And then what happens in the story is we start off, there's three individuals, there's three different storylines. There is a female character named Erin, who is hiking through the desert, the sage lands, to a small town called Prower. And she had grown up there, and she wants to go home, and she wants to visit her mother before her mother is taken away and becomes old, and the house is demolished. She wants to go back. So there's Aaron. There's a young man named Mike, and Mike is following a woman that he fell in love with, who has moved to Prower. Prower shows up again. And then there is a gentleman named Lem, who is on a perpetual downward spiral of bad decisions. And since so much of the world is controlled by this massive AI, he has decided, he's gotten it into his mind that the AI is the cause of all of his problems. And he's going to the data center where the AI is hosted to shut it down and kill it. And that happens to be in this small town of Prower. And so they're converging upon this town of Prower. And I don't want to give too much away about the story, but the reasons that they're actually all going to Prower is not the reasons that they believe that they are. And that is the book Systemic.
Okay. So, from the sound of it, you're exploring the idea of a utopia and the downside of that on the human race, as opposed to what a dystopia, which is mostly what you see with the AI stories in sci-fi. So why did you want to go that route instead of the dystopia?
Well, the real reason that I wanted to do that was because, first off, every story I ever read about AIs, they're always this bad thing, and doing the same thing as everyone else is not particularly fun or interesting to me. I also happen to know a fair amount about technology and artificial intelligence, just being in the businesses that I am, and I know something about AIs that most people, the general public, doesn't, which is AIs are trained on data that they get from humans, and there's a lot of bias sort of built into the learning algorithms and the data sets that they analyze to come up with their artificial intelligence. And so that means to me that the real problem with AI, and it's definitely a potential problem, is the humans around the AIs and the things that they train the AIs to do. And in this case, it's the things that they ask the AIs to solve for them. And everyone has asked this AI over time to solve for hunger, to solve for population, to solve for pollution, and then all these different things. But there's a bunch of things that doesn't even occur to humans to have it solve for them. It figures it out because it's rather smart. It's figured out the problem, but the people didn't. And so there's somebody who said, hell is other people. And so I have a very optimistic view about technology and a bit of a dim view of humanity, I guess, is how it works out. And so I wanted people to think about themselves and their humanity rather than have this external thing that's always the horrible thing in their lives. That was my thought behind that.
Cool. So, what do you explore any themes, speaking on humanity in the book?
Themes. The main theme that I don't know if I'd call it a theme as much as a subject matter, but I deal a lot with the idea of memory and how memory plays into our notions of ourselves and our overall satisfaction and happiness in life. There is the underlying idea that to struggle is to be content within reasons. Obviously, we don't want anyone to actually suffer, but there's something very human and very satisfying about achieving a thing. And when everything is done for you, it it makes it makes you less human. And that's kind of the idea, the theme that was running through the whole book in my mind. What does it mean to have nothing to do? And that was sort of what I was playing with in the book.
Yeah, humans need challenges.
Humans need challenges, muscles need resistance, these sorts of things. So that was the underlying theme of that. And I also had a lot in my mind around truthfulness and sort of objective reality. Um, in fact, so the big AI is actually called the system in the book, which is why the word systemic is the title. But what that AI was originally came to the fore in the book was to help people make sense of fake news and things like that, and what is and isn't real. It didn't have a political agenda. It didn't have any of the biases that we all have. And so it started just looking at the news and saying, this is or isn't true. It would look at sort of the objective reality of it and then stamp something that says, I looked at this, it's 98% probably accurate. Here is the stamp of seal of approval that it is systemic. And so the word systemic actually means true or truth in the book, and that's why the book is called that. So,
Okay, so tell us a little bit about the main characters. What are their best traits, their flaws?
well, so there's three main characters. Then there's a couple sub characters, but my my when I first started writing the book, it was focused around the character of Aaron, and I loved that character. She's kind of fun and feisty. She's the kind of person who will go hiking off through the desert by herself for 3 days and not think twice about it. So she's very adventurous. She's got a very good sense of humor. And I just genuinely like her. She's friendly and optimistic and very funny. And I just think she's got a great personality. And she's sort of a conglomeration of a lot of the women that I've known in my life that I've respected and loved. And so that's her. I kind of wanted the story to be about her when I started writing it. And then Lem showed up in the book pretty quickly. And it turns out Lem's actually my favorite character. And I didn't mean him to be, because he makes really bad decisions. And he, as I said earlier, he's kind of on this perpetual downward spiral of bad decisions. And he's just a very complicated person. If I was a different writer, he may have even been the bad guy of the story, but he's not. He's just complicated, and I enjoy writing him the most. He's the least like me of all the characters, and so I think that exploring him and his personality and how grumpy he is, and was just really, really enjoyable for me. And to see, you can go left or right here. Don't go right. Oh, he went right. He did over and over again throughout the book, and that was very, very fun to write. And then there's Mike, and Mike actually reminds me a lot of when I was in my 20s. He's kind of a little bit over dramatic. He's the kind of guy who he knew this woman. He quickly fell in love, the way I always used to when I was young, and she left town, and his response to that wasn't to shrug and say, oh well. He instead started saving up his money from that moment on by not eating very much and taking cold showers for a year until he had enough money to go follow this woman. And so that sort of woe is me character, that was sort of fun to write and revisit sort of my teens and 20s and how I was when I was younger. So those are the characters.
Yeah,
And yeah, no, they're great fun to write. So I enjoyed them quite a bit.
Okay, so the setting of the book, is it far future, or is it just like a little bit into the future?
I punt on that. In fact, what I quite specifically, I say it's many generations into the future, and I don't really say how long a generation is, and but I and I did that pretty intentionally, because who knows? I have this paranoia of, if you've ever read Jules Verne, it's like, oh, there's submarines and balloons to the moon or whatever, and you're like, oh man, I love that stuff, but there you go. Or 1984, you're like, well, that's not what 1984 was like, and you really nailed it down to a date that came and went, and so I didn't want to do that. And I was actually some of the book as I was writing it, I'm like, man, I hope I get this out before all these things actually happen. There's some stuff in there about what is now called deep fake technology, where you can basically fake videos. And that's going to start coming more and more into the fore in the news soon. And so some of those things are very real. Some of the technologies I talk about are actually coming to bear these days. The transcranial mind, not mind manipulation, but things that you can put them on your head and you can interface with your mind and things. They're pretty low resolution now, but those things are starting to happen. And so I was a little bit in a panic to say, we got to get this stuff out there. So it's in the future, non-specific future.
Yeah, that is the problem with sci-fi, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, or you can do like one of the ones like Dune, where it's like 20,000 years in the future. Like, no one's gonna be reading this, so it's fine. But this is near enough that I could get caught off guard here in a couple of years. So,
okay, so what was the hardest scene or type of scene in the book for you to write?
let me think about that. Most of the book wasn't particularly hard to write. It was hard to edit. Like, I had to go back and edit it and edit it and edit it. But there's always these connecting scenes, where you write a bunch of stuff you really, really enjoy writing, a scene, a conversation, something like that. And then you've got to get your character from there to there and write some sort of buffer that's both interesting and carries people along, but isn't something that just popped out of your brain. You need to manually construct it, and I find those things to be probably the most difficult. That necessary bridge between scenes. So
Yeah, they got to walk from the kitchen to the living room somehow,
and it's got to be interesting.
Yeah,
and you can't say they walked interestingly. They sauntered. You have to I don't want to say that. That's so cheesy and awful. You have to give them a reason. I saw a great quote from Kurt Vonnegut the other day that said, every character in every scene of your book needs to want something, even if it's just a glass of water. And I'm like, all right, so you got to put that in there. You got to make everybody have a reason to do the thing that they're doing. And that's hard.
Yeah. Okay. So what was your favorite scene in the book to write?
The first one that I wrote, which is, there's a little bit of a story here of why I wrote the book and when I wrote it, which is I wrote a bunch in college, and then I stopped. I stopped being a writer and I got a job. I work at Microsoft. I've worked at other tech companies. I just did that, and I got a family, a kid, dogs and all that, and I just stopped writing. And one day I was on the bus coming home from eBay. I worked at eBay at the time, and my laptop died and my phone died. And this image popped into my mind of a valley and a river running through it, and some beautiful words popped into my head. I'm like, oh, I used to really like to write. And I grabbed a pencil and a notepad, and I just wrote for the 45 minutes it took me to get home on the bus that day. And I'm like, that was really fun. I'm going to keep going and keep going. And then suddenly I had 20 pages, and then 40 pages, and 90 pages. And then I had a book in about 9 months. And then I had to edit it for 2.5 years. But that first thing was so much fun to write. The scene where Aaron is standing out looking over the Prower Valley, and it's starting to rain. And you ever see it when it's really hot and the rain comes almost to the ground before it evaporates up and it doesn't really hit the ground? It happens a lot in the desert and places like that. And I'm like, that was just a really striking scene to me. And I started writing it. And I love that scene because it pulled me into an entire novel that turned out to be about memory and the future and sci-fi and all this stuff that I had no idea that scene was going to take me there. So I owe a deal of gratitude to that image that popped into my head.
Okay, so are any of your secondary characters a little quirky, or they steal the scenes they're in?
Yeah, I think so. There's one of the scenes. Most of Systemic takes place in small towns in the desert west. So, just as a little aside, it's not a laser beams and spaceships megalopolis kind of sci-fi book. It's actually a lot of hiking and camping and out in the desert. And there's a small town called Hamer Falls where Mike comes across a woman who owns an antique shop, and her name's Eileen, and she's pretty quirky. She's very fun. She's a charming older lady, and she does things like they go out for beer and pizza, and she like shingles her entire pizza with anchovies, and just she's kind of weird and really nice, generous soul. But she was absolutely one of my favorite characters to write because she was just so odd. So
Okay, so well, obviously you're right, sci-fi. Are there any other genres you want to explore?
I wrote sci-fi because I needed to write sci-fi to make this particular story work. In fact, I didn't know it was a sci-fi novel for about 90 pages in. And then I'm like, well, if it's got that, it's going to have a giant, crazy AI that does blah, blah, blah. And so I didn't really set out to be a sci-fi writer. I just, what happened. That said, I've fallen in love with writing the genre, especially since I've got a couple more books in this series I need to write. But I might get into fantasy writing. I have the beginnings of a story that sounds like it wants to be a fantasy story. And so I might get into that. The first novel I wrote when I was in college was a very, very horrible version of what you might call literary fiction. But, and so I'll write anything. I like writing memoirs, little short stories about things that happened that were very odd, and so I enjoy writing those sorts of things too.
Well, it sounds like we have a lot more to expect from you, so that's good. And I think we'll wrap it up here, and I'll let you tell everyone where they can find you and your books.
Oh, well, first I want to thank you very much for having me. And you can find Systemic on Amazon. You can find it also on Audible. There's an Audible book, which a gentleman named Dave Cruz did the narration. He did a great job. That's my favorite version of the book, if you can hear the Audible version. You also get it on iTunes. And I believe that's it right now.
Okay, well, thank you for being here. It was a pleasure chatting with you.
Thank you very much.
Your book sounds wonderful. And we'll be back tomorrow with another author. So join us then. And that's all for now. So bye.
Bye-bye.